Hi everyone, welcome to the 13th episode of the Average USA Citizen Show. I am David, your host, and this week's episode is all about the requirements and powers of both the US President and Vice President. Now, before I get started, I'd just like to let everybody know that this week you might see me using notes because we're going to be discussing a lot of facts, and I want to give you the best information I can. Normally I just do this show as a conversational, like just from the top of my head and from my own knowledge, but I really wanted to give you the facts, and everything that I will give you comes straight from the Constitution and straight from several other different websites dealing with the requirements for the President and Vice President of the United States. You can find all this information online, but I just wanted to point this out since we are in an election year. I think it's very necessary for everybody to know what we're voting for. You know, I don't know about you, but I've always wondered, could I be the President of the United States? Do I meet the requirements? Well, we're going to be discussing that. We'll also be discussing about the Vice President, because I don't know about you, but when you talk to people about politics and the President, if you mention, oh, what about the Vice President, most people don't even know who the Vice President is. That's pretty bad. So, we're going to talk about the Vice President's role too. Now, as always, this show is all about, interaction. So if you have anything to add to, or, you want to say anything about what I'm talking about, feel free to go onto Facebook and leave a post there, or go on to YouTube and leave a post there underneath the video. Send a video response, whatever you'd like to do, we'd like to hear from you. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, why, again, is this important? Well, if you're going to be voting for something, shouldn't you know what the requirements of what you're voting for? Especially President and Vice President. Kind of big, kind of important. So, let's talk about the President first, okay? We'll talk about the requirements for both positions, and then we'll move on to responsibilities and powers further along. Now, what are the requirements for being President of the United States? The Constitution only lists 3 qualifications for presidency. That's right, 3, to be the President of the United States. Number 1, the President must be 35 years old or older. Well, I guess I could be President so far. Number 2, a natural-born citizen. Okay, I'm batting 2 for 2, looks good. And then the third one, must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. Now, that's kind of a strange one, but, and it's also kind of vague in the Constitution about, when does that 14 years start? Is it, consecutive 14 years? Generally speaking, I believe it's at least consecutive 14 years, but it's vague in the Constitution, in case you're wondering. I don't think it's ever been an issue, but, in case you're wondering about that. The President, another thing is, presidents, when you vote for a president, I know most people think when you vote for president that, that's how they get elected. I don't know if you've heard of the Electoral College, but they're the ones that actually elect a president. They're the ones that actually cast the votes. It's a strange system. You can actually win the popular vote, which is yours and my votes, and lose the presidency if you don't get enough electoral votes. Now later on, maybe in the next few weeks, I'm going to be discussing the Electoral College in more in depth. So I'm not really going to go into it this time because I'm basically centering on, the requirements for being president and vice president. But it's a good topic because most people don't know what the Electoral College is and what the purpose is and the background, the history, and, have an opinion about it. Well, like a lot of things, I have an opinion about it, but I will be discussing that later. So, every November, every fourth year in November, we hold our general elections for president. And in that election, the Electoral College, which is made up of members from all different states, gather together and vote. Okay? There are approximately 538 electors in the country. It's based on population, and like I said, I'm going to get into the topic of the Electoral College later on in the next few weeks. But there's 538 of them, and they're the ones who actually cast the vote for the president and vice president. Okay, so that's all for being the requirements for being president. So basically, if you're over 35, you were born in this country, and you've lived in this country for at least 14 years, you could be president of the United States of America. There are no other requirements in the Constitution, and, so that means I could run for president. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean I'd win or get very many votes at all or anything, but I could run technically. And again, I'm going to probably discuss more about the party system later on. I just want to stick to the president and vice president right now. We're going to go ahead and move to the vice president. What are the requirements to be vice president? Well, of course, the vice president requirements are the same as far as age. You must be 35 years old or older. And of course, you must be a natural-born citizen. And you must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years. Now, of course, that has to be that way because you could be, one of the main roles of the vice president is to take over for the president if he cannot fulfill his duties. So, of course, you have to fill that role, too. So that's, that's why this is important. And, again, just like the president, they are elected by the Electoral College. And, again, we'll talk about that more in depth as we get closer to elections. Now, I'm going to be discussing powers and responsibilities. I'll start off with the president. Now, keep in mind that the vice president, if the president cannot fulfill his duties, the vice president's main responsibility would be to step into the office of the president. So, the duties would be the same if that happens. But the vice president does have some duties, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. Let's start with the president of the United States. So we found out that he just has to be over 35 years old, natural-born citizen, and that he has to be living here for 14 years, over 14 years. Doesn't say anything about having any kind of degree or any kind of, prior political experience or served in any position experience. No, it doesn't say anything about that. Just three just little rules to make it as president. Okay, but now, here are the powers and responsibilities. Now, granted, some of these are hard, so if you don't know a lot, you're going to not be able to handle this job, I think, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so, the president is both the head of the state and the head of the government of the United States and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's a lot. It sounds like a little bit, but that's a lot. These powers are given under Article 2 of the Constitution. See, the Constitution, if you don't know, gives the power to the government. Any government official, elected official, like the president, vice president, the Congress, senators, all those people, their powers are detailed in the Constitution. And that's where they are given power. That's where their power lies, in the Constitution. So under Article 2 of the Constitution is where the powers are dictated for the president. The president is responsible for the execution and enforcement of the laws created by Congress. Congress makes laws. The president is responsible for making those laws happen, enforcing them. Simple English. There are 15 executive departments. Each are led by an appointed member of the president's cabinet. So the president is responsible for appointing those department heads. Okay? They carry out the day-to-day administration of the federal government. So again, he's the boss. Well, we know he's the boss, but this is just detailing what he does. They are also joined by other executive agencies, such as the CIA and the Environmental Protection Agency. The heads of which, the CIA and the Environmental Protection Agencies, are not part of the cabinet. They're not part of the president's cabinet, but they are fully under the authority of the President of the United States. The President also appoints the heads of more than 50 independent federal commissions, such as the federal commissions, as well as federal judges, ambassadors, and other federal officers. The EOP, or Executive Office of the President, consists of the immediate staff to the President, along with entities such as the Office of Management and Budget and the Office of the United States Trade Representative. I'm detailing a lot and I'm reading a lot to make sure I'm getting the information out. You can also look this up online, but I'm just putting it out here too. The President also has the power to sign legislation into law or to veto bills enacted by Congress, although Congress may override a veto with a 2/3 vote of both houses. The executive branch conducts diplomacy with other nations, and the President has the power to negotiate and sign treaties which must be ratified by a 2/3 vote of the Senate. The President can issue executive orders, another thing he can do. He also has unlimited power to extend pardons, clemencies for federal crimes, except in the case of impeachment. But with all his great powers that he has, he does have some responsibilities. He has to give a State of the Union address. So I know, like everybody else, every once in a while, which is actually around every January, the President gives his State of the Union address. It's dictated by the Constitution. It's in his responsibilities to give an overview of the country and to give the general plan for the forthcoming year. So it's basically like how we're doing, where we're going. Kind of like to relate it to you and I, to relate it to us, it's kind of like a performance review at your work. Kind of on a bigger scale, but it's kind of like that. So you'll notice every January, that's been the typical time when they do it, the President will do his big State of the Union address. And it's not something to take lightly. In fact, I would encourage every one of my listeners to watch it. It's very important because it tells us how we're doing and what the President's plan is for the future for our country. So, and it's also mandated by the Constitution, so it must be kind of important. Now, that gives you an idea of what the president does. Now, I said, again, that, there's a lot to what I said there. I mean, each one of those things is a big issue. And I'll discuss, my input and what I think about it in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and give you the primary duties of the vice president, okay? The primary duties of the vice president is to be ready at any moment's notice to assume the presidency if the president is unable to return to his duties. I mean, it's not just if a president gets killed. I mean, if a president is unable, like for example, if the president needed surgery, okay, and the president had to be put under sedation, then from that point where he's unconscious, then the vice president would be acting president until the president is able to resume his normal duties. I mean, it's important. I mean, it might seem a little like, oh, he's going to be president for like a minute. No, it's a big deal. If anything happens, we need somebody to lead us. And the Constitution puts into place the vice president and gives him his role to do that. Some people don't see the vice president as a big deal, but vice president is a big deal, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, the vice president is also the president of the Senate, the U.S. Senate. That's because the vice president will cast the deciding vote in case of a tie. But it's very rarely that an acting vice president will rule over or preside over the Senate. But if there's a tie that's going on, his vote breaks the tie. So that's important, If it's a heated, debated thing and it's like close and it comes down to a tie, the vice president's decision makes the decision. But mostly he doesn't preside over the Senate. Each vice president approaches his role a little bit different. The actual defined clear role of the vice president in Constitution mostly is about if something happens to the president. Except for the being president of the Senate, he really doesn't have any other duties. So typically what they do is they take on a specific policy portfolio. They take up something like that. Maybe that's what they do. Or like, I believe I might be wrong, so if I'm wrong, I think Al Gore really took on the environmental issues when he was vice president under Bill Clinton. But another thing they do is they serve as a top advisor to the president. Now, I know that's one of the roles that Bush played, Senior Bush played when he was vice president under Reagan. I mean, President Bush, he was cool. I guess that's just my own thing. Worked for the CIA. He had a lot of background in working with the international community. So he really helped out Reagan's cabinet, really helped him out during Reagan's years. I believe, to be a strong, great president, you have to have the people in place to make you that way. And Bush was one of them as a VP. One of the better VPs that I've seen, since I've been, following this, he's been like one of the better VPs. But, okay, so I gave you the breakdown of what the president and vice president do and what their responsibilities are. Now, let me just point out a few things. First of all, like I said, the president isn't like a king. He just doesn't do everything by himself and make all the decisions himself. What he does, he appoints the right people to help make his job easier. That's what his goal is, to get the right people in the right positions. I mean, he's the ultimate manager, and he manages a big, big organization. And he's got to get the right people in the right places, or he doesn't have a good administration. And his backup, his main man, should be the VP, should be the vice president. You have to understand, you want a strong vice president. Why? If something happens to the president, he moves in. If you got somebody who's not good, it's going to really screw up things. So when they're talking about who should be vice president, really, really hope that we get a good vice president, because that'll make a difference for the presidency and for the administration and for us, all us average citizens. So I gave you all the requirements and the responsibilities for both president and vice president. Now you have a better understanding of what they do and what's required of them. And if you want to learn more, you can search online. They have a bunch of different sites that will tell you about it. You can even go to the whitehouse.org or .gov, actually. I think it's either .gov or .org, I don't remember. And they can give you a detailed background on that too. But I would encourage everybody to, look at the Constitution. That's where the power of those two offices are created. That's where they get their power. And that's where you'll find the requirements for those positions. Now, if you want to know what they actually do, you can find that out too. And I've detailed it some, but you can look online too. Now, maybe in the next couple weeks, I'm going to be discussing the Electoral College. I know that's the next big thing, because people are probably wondering right now, like, what do you mean there's this Electoral College that, what do you mean somebody can win the popular vote and not get elected president? We'll discuss that, and we'll discuss my opinion about that in a forthcoming show. So, once again, this is the Average USA Citizen Show, where we say, with great freedom comes great responsibility. Thank you, and I'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.